Real quick before we get into the video, I just wanted to announce that I now have a Patreon. If you'd be interested in supporting me, you can click the link in the description to learn more about that. Thanks for watching. Liminal spaces have been popular for quite a while now. Long enough to where I think a lot of people, myself included, assumed the trend was on its way out. The 2020s internet aesthetic trend cycle moves quickly after all. But then the Backrooms movie came out in May of this year, based on 20-year-old director Kane Parsons' YouTube analog horror series, which itself was inspired by the Backrooms creepypasta that produced probably the most recognizable liminal space image of all time. It was a smash success, becoming A24's highest-grossing film to date and making Parsons the youngest director to reach #1 at the box office, proving that people are in fact still interested in liminal spaces. If we look at Google search trends for the term liminal spaces, we see a huge spike around the end of March 2026, which is when the trailer for Backrooms dropped, and it's been trending upward ever since. I watched the movie and the web series it's based on, and I enjoyed both. The movie in particular pleasantly surprised me given the less than stellar track record both YouTuber movies and movies based on creepypastas have. I thought they did an awesome job of bringing the Backrooms to life and accurately conveying the creepiness of the original image. That being said, it didn't really feel representative of liminal spaces more broadly to me. Liminal spaces have come to be closely associated with horror for a lot of people, but as an OG liminal space fan, and I'm talking like pre-Backrooms, that's never really been the main thing that drew me to them. And that's not because I don't like horror, I'm a massive horror fan. It's that to me, liminal spaces have always been more comforting than scary. So today I want to explore what exactly liminal spaces are, how the liminal space aesthetic became so popular, and why they aren't quite as horrifying as we've been making them out to be. Liminal spaces might not be that scary, but you know what is? Finding out your personal information is for sale online. My sponsor Cloaked asked me to put my phone number into their free scanning tool, and the results were shocking. It immediately returned all kinds of private info. Name, address, even social security number. It was extremely concerning to learn that all of that stuff is just out there. It made me feel really vulnerable. Data brokers are making billions selling your info to spammers, scammers, and stalkers. Most people don't realize that every time you sign up for something and agree to the terms and conditions, you are consenting to having your personal data collected and sold. They're betting you won't do anything about it, and the majority of people don't. Other services will remove your data after it's already out there, but the problem is you keep creating new vulnerabilities every time you enter your email address or phone number into a new site. This is where Cloaked can help. Cloaked uncovers where your data is being sold and removes it, but their app also lets you generate unlimited burner email addresses, usernames, and phone numbers whenever you sign up for something. You can call, text, and email from these burners inside the app, and they can't be tied back to your identity. If a data broker gets their hands on them, they've just paid for worthless info. You're the one playing them now. Cloaked also includes dark web monitoring, a built-in VPN and password manager, spam call filtering, and a $1 million identity theft insurance policy. Go to cloak.com/randymoon and enter your phone number for a free security scan. It only takes a few seconds, so you'll be able to see if your SSN is for sale right now. The longer you wait, the more of your information gets bought and sold. If you're ready to take it back, use cloak.com/randymoon to get 30% off any plan. Thank you to Cloak for sponsoring, and now back to the video. Odds are you're at least somewhat familiar with what liminal spaces are. I've actually covered them before in my Tumblr Aesthetics series, but I really want to go beneath the surface to get to the root of what makes something a liminal space and how the aesthetic came to be. And in order to do that, I finally get to put my bachelor's degree in anthropology to good use. Liminality is an anthropological concept that describes the experience of being in a state of transition. The word liminal comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. The concept was first developed in the late 19th century by anthropologist Arnold van Gennep, initially to describe rites of passage in tribal cultures. The middle stage of these rites was referred to as the liminal phase, where the participants' pre-rite status in society has been dissolved, but they have not yet completed the transition to their post-rite status. The concept of liminality has since been applied more broadly to other areas of culture and society. For instance, teenagers can be said to be in a liminal phase since they are no longer young children, but have yet to achieve all the legal rights and freedoms of adults. Twilight exists as the liminal time between day and night. Entire countries or societies can be in a liminal state when rebuilding or restructuring after a major cataclysmic event like a war or natural disaster. Existing in a liminal state can make individuals feel detached from those around them or society at large, and may cause them to question their identity, but also gives them the space to explore new ways of being. Even before the liminal space aesthetic developed online, the concept of liminality had been applied to physical spaces. French anthropologist Marc Auger coined the term non-places in the 90s. He described them as transient places, not meant to be inhabited or occupied for long periods of time, and distinct from third places where people are meant to come together. In non-places, everyone is anonymous. This could include places like highways, hotels, airports, or shopping centers. One of the first uses of the term liminal spaces online, in the context we think of it now, was in a 2016 Tumblr post created by the user Pez Uzi. The post was titled "Places Where Reality is a Bit Altered," and listed various locales like abandoned 7-Elevens, hospitals at midnight, and empty parking lots. Other users reblogged the post with their own additions, including playgrounds at night, rest stops on highways, schools during breaks, stairwells, and airports in the early morning. A user called the Crepes of Wrath then reblogged the post and explained that the reason these places feel off is because they are liminal spaces, throughways from one point to the next, places whose existence is not about themselves but the things before and after them. This aligns with the anthropological concepts of liminality and non-places. This explanation certainly describes some of the locations listed in the post, like rest stops, stairwells, and airports, but others, like schools during break, playgrounds at night, or abandoned stores, don't quite fit this description. The Crepes of Wrath continued by explaining that these places feel weird because they are removed from their usual context. We are used to seeing these places in daylight, full of people, so when they are dark and deserted, it can feel discomforting. The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, who created the word anemoia that I talked about in my Vaporwave video, has a term for this feeling as well: canopsia, the haunting quality of seeing a location typically full of people in a state of emptiness or abandonment. This feeling of canopsia is reminiscent of the uncanny valley effect, a theory that explains people's emotional responses to humanoid objects. If we look at this graph, we see that the more human-like something looks, the more positive people's responses to it are, except for this dip in the middle, which is known as the uncanny valley. This results from the ambiguity of something looking almost human, but not quite, so our brains don't quite know what to make of it and we become uneasy. This explains why we find things like androids, reborn dolls, and AI-generated videos of people creepy. Some people have posited that the uncanny valley theory can be applied to physical places as well. When something looks close to how we would expect it to look, but something is ever so slightly off, whether it be the lighting, architecture, or lack of people or objects, it makes us uncomfortable. While the places themselves might not be literally liminal, it could be said that they cause a sort of emotional liminality by looking at them. This Tumblr post became the foundational text for the liminal space aesthetic. Despite not every location listed in the post fitting the traditional definition of liminal, anything that had the same vibe as the listed locations, that elicited that feeling of canopsia or uncanniness, got lumped in under the liminal space label. People began reblogging images of these kinds of places and tagging them as liminal spaces. I think a lot of people think the liminal space aesthetic started with the backrooms, but actually no, that's not the truth, Ellen. If we look back at our Google search trends graph, we see the first small spike just after 2016 when Pez Uzi's post was made. But because Tumblr's cultural influence and active user base has been declining ever since the mid-2010s, I think a lot of people just aren't aware that this is where it all started. The aesthetic was by no means a big thing during this time, and I imagine it was largely unheard of outside of Tumblr, so there's not a lot of documentation on the early days of liminal spaces. Tumblr's search function is also virtually useless, so it's not even like I can search liminal spaces before 2019 to see what people were posting at the time. So everything I'm about to talk about regarding the liminal space aesthetic on Tumblr pre-Backrooms era is coming mostly from my own recollections and looking through the archives of my old blogs. The liminal space aesthetic was heavily influenced by other aesthetics that were popular on Tumblr at the time, particularly Vaporwave, Morute, Traumacore, Weirdcore, Kidcore, and Cursed Images. Again, I have a whole series of videos talking about Tumblr aesthetics that you can watch if you want to learn more about any of these. But for today, I'm mostly going to talk about how they pertain to liminal spaces. I just did a video specifically dedicated to Vaporwave, which, if you've seen, you may recall that I mentioned images of pools, dead malls, and lonely cities at night being part of the aesthetic. Images that fit right in with the liminal space aesthetic. Nostalgia and vague feelings of unease are significant aspects of Vaporwave, and I think that's why Vaporwave music and liminal spaces go really well together. Liminal space compilations on YouTube and TikTok are often set to Vaporwave music. Morute, which is a portmanteau of morbid and cute, was an aesthetic that had been around since the very early days of Tumblr. It focused on the juxtaposition of cuteness and hyperfemininity with darker imagery and themes. One major theme was the loss of innocence and desire to return to childhood. This was shown through vintage-looking photographs of children's bedrooms, playgrounds, or amusement parks. Often these places were abandoned or photographed at night, giving them that darker, more sinister edge, and many of them fall in line with what we would now consider a liminal space image. This aspect of Morute carried over into Traumacore, which explored similar themes by layering text and cute or nostalgic PNGs over top of images of abandoned homes or playgrounds at night. Weirdcore and its closely related aesthetic Dreamcore had a similar visual style as Traumacore with the collage-like edits, but focused less on childhood trauma as a central theme. Instead, they emphasized nostalgia and dreamlike surrealism, though they often still elicited feelings of unease. Again, the basis for these edits were images that could be considered liminal spaces, featuring things like empty rooms, stairwells, parking lots, and stores, but edited to look even more uncanny, sometimes featuring text or early web graphics. Kidcore and Nostalgiacore were two aesthetics that were also closely related. I know Kidcore kind of became more about fashion once it reached TikTok in the early 2020s, but that was less of a focus on Tumblr in the late 2010s from what I recall. These aesthetics were all about childhood nostalgia, but without any of the darkness of the previous aesthetics. Given Tumblr's primarily Gen Z and millennial user base, this mainly meant nostalgia for the 90s and 2000s. Comfort and escapism were emphasized, and much of the imagery consisted of actual photos from these eras of places commonly associated with childhood, like homes, schools, play areas, pools, stores, and suburban neighborhoods. In order for these images to be as broadly nostalgic as possible, there usually weren't any people in them, giving them a liminal feel. I think maybe the biggest precursor to the liminal space aesthetic is one that seems to have been largely forgotten, or at least I never see anyone talk about it, and that is cursed images. It was almost more of a meme than an aesthetic, but it did get popular enough to spread outside of Tumblr, but was fairly short-lived. On Tumblr around the mid-2010s, it had become popular for people to tag or caption any weird or unexplainable image they reblogged with cursed image. Many of these images came from a blog called Internet History, who had been uploading various strange images they had found around the web since 2011. In 2015, a blog called Cursed Images was created and began doing the same thing, launching the cursed images aesthetic to popularity. They sourced most of their uploads from Flickr, an image hosting service that was popular in the 2000s. Before the days of cloud storage and most modern social media sites, many amateur photographers used Flickr to host and share personal photos. The images were presented on the blog without context and had a distinctly unsettling aura. In a 2019 interview with Paper, the owner of the blog said, quote, "Some of these forgotten photographs just had an eerie mood about them, like someone had captured a moment from a dream or another life. I was particularly interested in finding photos of dark and empty rooms, mannequins, and costumes, all of which became common themes among cursed images. They're images of memories that never actually happened to you, but the moment you see them, it's suddenly happening to you. There is nothing inherently sinister about most cursed images, but their mystery and the lack of explanation for what you were looking at made them simultaneously off-putting and fascinating. If you track down the sources for some of these images and learn the stories behind them, they become distinctly less creepy. This famous image of a toilet full of frogs was the result of someone's basement flooding in New South Wales, Australia. This traumatized-looking Garfield plush is just from an eBay listing. This woman on the ceiling in what appears to be an alien couple's kitchen is from a TripAdvisor review for a tourist attraction at Area 51 in Roswell, New Mexico. There's something else, though. These pictures all have a certain look to them that adds to the eeriness. If we look at some cursed images, we'll see that they have a few attributes in common. The use of flash, noise, blur, orbs, white balance that's way off. These are all hallmarks of the digital point-and-shoot cameras that were the predominant photo capturing device of the 2000s. Film cameras were falling out of style, smartphones didn't exist yet, and DSLR cameras were mainly only used by professional photographers. So if you wanted to document a vacation, a family gathering, a night out with friends, or just take a mirror selfie, you used one of these. They were everywhere for about a decade until the rise of smartphones rendered them obsolete. You could say that they were liminal cameras. Their short reign places the distinct style of photos they produce squarely in that ambiguous, uncanny valley zone, where they look more modern than vintage film photographs, but not modern enough to belong to the post-2010 smartphone era. While the cursed images trend may have died out, blogs that re-upload found images from Flickr and other relics of the 2000s web have remained a staple of the Tumblr ecosystem. Some curate images that have that creepy, unsettling vibe, while others cultivate a more cozy, nostalgic one. These blogs are responsible for popularizing many of the now iconic liminal space images. Whether you like it or not, all roads on the modern internet lead back to one of two places: Tumblr or 4chan. While the former website is responsible for birthing the liminal space aesthetic, the latter is responsible for bringing it to the masses. In May 2019, a post was made on 4chan's X board titled Unsettling Images, where the OP asked Anons to post disquieting images that just feel off. Many of the images posted in the thread were in a similar vein to the cursed images and liminal space photos that were circulating on Tumblr. The OP had attached an image of a strange empty room with yellow carpet, wallpaper, and fluorescent lighting, photographed on a Dutch angle. One Anon replied to this image asking, "What is that?" Another Anon replied to them, "If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." The image and the accompanying story spread outside of 4chan shortly after, becoming a popular creepypasta known as the Backrooms. It also brought greater attention to the liminal space aesthetic, as the Backrooms photo was widely considered to be a perfect example of a liminal space. The story amped the creepiness factor of the photo up even more, taking it from a vague, uneasy feeling to full-on horror. Looking at our search trends graph again, we can see that searches for liminal spaces exploded around 2020 after the Backrooms creepypasta was posted and spread around the internet. The liminal space photos from Tumblr found a new audience on other websites. r/liminal space was created on Reddit in late 2019 and now has over 1 million subscribers. A year later, in 2020, @SpaceLiminalBot was created on Twitter and quickly gained over 1 million followers before seemingly being suspended sometime in 2023. Elon wasn't fucking with liminal spaces, I guess. Slideshows of liminal space images set to eerie or melancholic music flooded YouTube and TikTok. The Backrooms itself became something of an online phenomenon. People began adding to the lore of the creepypasta, inventing different levels of the Backrooms based on various popular liminal space images and the malevolent entities that reside in them. It became a sort of collective storytelling project that anyone could participate in, akin to the SCP Foundation. Others used the Backrooms as inspiration for their own personal creative projects, from video games to ARGs. Probably the most well-known of these is Kane Parsons' analog horror series here on YouTube. The first video, titled The Backrooms Found Footage, was posted in early 2022 and has accumulated 91 million views. It follows a cameraman who accidentally clips into the backrooms and is chased and eventually caught by some sort of monster. The video references other famous liminal space images, including the picture of the Terminal 4 hotels at Heathrow Airport in London, and this real estate photo of a house in Ashburn, Virginia. Kane's series and the movie adaptation leaned into the horror of the Backrooms even more, with multiple people getting trapped and killed in the Backrooms, and a shadowy corporation behind the scenes allowing it all to happen. Various other horror media have taken inspiration from liminal spaces, including the video game Exit 8 and its film adaptation, the 2022 movie Skinamarink, and the Apple TV series Severance. The Backrooms is when liminal spaces began to be associated with horror for a lot of people. While looking at photos of liminal spaces can certainly elicit feelings of unease, as we've talked about, I wouldn't really say they're all that scary unless you attach a narrative about being trapped alone and hunted by a creature to them. If we reattach the Backrooms photo to its original context, it becomes almost laughably mundane. The origin of the photo was unknown for a long time, which I think added to the spookiness surrounding it, but it was discovered in 2024 that it came from a 2002 blog post by the owners of a hobby store who were renovating an old furniture showroom in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I don't think interpreting liminal spaces through a horror lens is like an incorrect way of engaging with them, but it's definitely not the only way. With the rise of the backrooms and other liminal space-inspired horror media, I think other interpretations became less popular, which is kind of a shame in my opinion. When I look at these pictures, I don't feel afraid or alone, I feel comforted. I'd argue that the original appeal of liminal spaces and what allowed them to resonate with so many people was the more positive emotions they were capable of evoking. There are a few ways that liminal spaces can be comforting. I pointed out earlier that liminal spaces became hugely popular around 2020, which, yes, was immediately following the Backrooms creepypasta, but as you may recall, that wasn't the only thing that happened that year. Why were people so drawn to these seemingly eerie and desolate images during such a scary and uncertain time? Well, if you think about it, they kind of reflected our reality at the time. During lockdowns, places that would normally have been full of people, schools, malls, office buildings, became deserted, just as in many liminal space photos. As a society, we were collectively existing in a liminal state between the pre-pandemic era and the post-pandemic era. Liminal spaces acknowledged and made visible this state of transition we were in and reaffirmed that others were seeing the world the same way we were, helping us feel less alone. However, I think the main source of comfort in liminal spaces is their ability to induce nostalgia. It's common to see people in online liminal space communities saying that these images feel strangely familiar, even if they have never actually visited the location in the image. Liminal spaces seem to have particularly struck a chord with members of Gen Z. Some studies have shown that Gen Z are more nostalgic than older generations, so to me it makes sense why they would be drawn to liminal spaces. As I mentioned earlier, many popular liminal space images were originally taken in the 2000s, when most members of Gen Z would have been children, and circulated on Tumblr as part of various childhood nostalgia-focused aesthetics. They have that distinctive 2000s digital camera look, calling to mind old family photos from the time. Even Kane Parsons has said that part of what drew him to the Backrooms photo and liminal spaces in general was that they were reminiscent of hazy memories and family photos from his early childhood in the 2000s. This is actually why a lot of the stuff that gets posted on r/liminal space nowadays doesn't really hit the same for me, because it was very clearly shot on an iPhone or includes like modern cars and TVs. Liminal space pictures also frequently feature locations that recall common childhood experiences. Swimming in a hotel pool while on vacation, stopping for lunch at a rest stop during a road trip, playing in a McDonald's play place, going to school after hours for parent-teacher conferences, making a wish at the mall fountain. Since liminal space images typically don't have any people in them and lack context about where exactly they are, it's easy to fill in the blanks yourself and project your own memories onto them. Nostalgia has long been pathologized throughout history, but recent evidence actually shows that it can have several benefits. Several studies have shown that nostalgia can combat feelings of loneliness and depression and help people cope when going through tough times. It can help them feel more positive about themselves and their lives and optimistic about the future. Apparently, it can even aid in people going through transitional periods in their life. Obviously, the pandemic sucked for everyone, but I think it hit young people especially hard. It disrupted our education or affected our ability to enter the workforce, and caused us to miss out on typical coming-of-age activities like prom, graduation, partying, or traveling. We were entering adulthood during a time where the future felt very uncertain. Another recent study found that, in addition to being more nostalgic, Gen Z also experiences higher rates of stress and anxiety than older generations. So it's no wonder that in a world that felt increasingly unrecognizable and unstable, we turned to things that reminded us of the past to regain a sense of comforting familiarity and stability. We know exactly what to expect from the past because it already happened. We are in control of how we remember and re-experience it. We had the double whammy of being in two transitional states at once, moving from childhood to young adulthood and living through the pandemic. So it was comforting to see that liminality reflected back at us in a way that also harkened back to a time when everything just felt simpler. All that being said, it is possible to get too caught up in nostalgia and forget to live your life, speaking from personal experience. You can only reap the benefits of nostalgia if you're not comparing the present to the past. If we view the past with rose-tinted glasses, it can start to feel like everything was way better back then, that things have gotten worse and will only continue to get worse, which of course isn't true. There were plenty of crises that happened during my childhood: 9/11, the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and the 2008 financial crisis, to name a few. They just didn't directly affect me as much because I was a child. I was too busy playing Just Dance 2 for the Nintendo Wii. It's easy to think everything's cooked and we're doomed when you're carrying the 24/7 bad news device in your pocket at all times, but in the grand scheme of things, a lot of stuff has actually improved in the past 20 years. I think if I woke up tomorrow to find that I had been transported back to 2006, I wouldn't enjoy it very much. The past you're longing for is gone, and you can never go back. The only thing you can do is keep moving forward. You might be able to catch momentary glimpses of it in a grainy photo of a school hallway or indoor playground, but these liminal spaces also serve as a reminder that the point of liminality is to eventually exit on the other side. What do liminal spaces make you feel? Are you comforted or disturbed, or maybe both? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, giving it a like, sharing with a friend, or subscribing to the channel would all be very much appreciated. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Thank you to the inaugural Randy Moon patrons, and an extra special thank you to my top tier patrons, Brandon G and Hada Vuff. You guys are awesome.